Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Morning, brother.
Hey mate, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. How are you, my man?
Yeah, good. How's your voice holding up so far?
It's there. It's holding.
What's it
in.
from the weekend? Too much shouting?
Yeah, man. We did loads and loads of. So I was doing the British Firefighter Challenge, and I hosted the Welsh Firefighter Challenge.
Taking part.
Yeah, so I've been taking it for God knows how many years now. God, when did it start? God, I started a long ass time ago, but yeah, I've been hosting it for probably the past 4 years, and it's kind of walked hand in hand with like the growth of the podcast. But I'm still learning. I mean, there's a combination of probably the sound systems that we use, and also me tempering my enthusiasm, because I can be a bugger for just getting overly excited and probably getting a little bit shouty. I've got to drill that one down a little bit, but it's a 2-day event. Have you ever seen it? I mean, you probably glanced at it at some point in time, but it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And after the first day, everybody wants to meet up and have some beers and do the social aspect to it and all that sort of stuff. But I've spent like 9 hours just broadcasting, and for me, it just completely thrashes me. So I just like to go and sit in a quiet room, to be honest with you, and not have to just listen to myself or listen to other people. And I think people find that with podcasting. I was speaking with James Gearing, because obviously he went on Behind the Shield, and we were talking about how people are so engaged in more sort of fast food conversations, and we're hungering for those kind of really in-depth conversations now. We've never been so connected as we ever have before, but also in the same respect, we've never felt so lacking in those deep conversations, because we're so used to like quick exchanges and stuff like that. So yeah, I suppose it's trying to strike the balance with that sort of stuff. How was your weekend?
No, I'll take on board what you said. Yeah, I think I can imagine how exhausting that was. I mean, it's tiring sometimes just kind of recording a podcast, isn't it? So I've done a few now. Mate, so I can imagine what it's like to host it, because you've got an extra dimension to it. But doing 9 hours of hosting and comparing, and obviously being in the moment as well with all that energy, I think is tiring, isn't it? I hear you.
I love this bit.
I do know that's good, man. I mean, you must do. How long have you been doing it?
We've been doing the podcast. I think I tried to gauge it off episodes, because we're at like 170 something, and I always used to say we do one a week, but actually we're doing like probably doing like 6 a month now. So I don't know, but I think we've just passed 2 years. And I know I was talking to James, he's 6 years deep. And what I was saying to him as well, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. There's so many things that kicked off during the pandemic. One of them was podcasts. I mean, everyone started a goddamn podcast during the pandemic. Ours was a little while before it. And what I'm interested in seeing over the coming years, or even the coming months, is so many people dropping off, because it is you've got to love it. It's the kind of thing that you can't really fake.
Yeah.
And there's certain professions that you can. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I've owned a couple of gyms and stuff, and I was coaching and personal training, and you almost become a professional counter. I mean, I'm sure you've had those moments rolling your eyes at PTs in the gym and stuff like that. And there's some incredible people out there, but they've not gone to that next level like yourself, where they've got the real passion in learning the long-term health and well-being for people. For me, you can't fake a 3-hour conversation or a 1-hour conversation if you're not sincerely interested in the person or in what you're doing. And that's the difference I see between podcasting versus like newsreels or radios or something like that. And podcasting's not for everybody, but I feel like it's the purest form of social media, because you can't fake it. Like you can fake a lot of stuff on social media, but with this, you're either interested or you're not.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen a lot of podcasts start and they get to about 40, 50 episodes, and then they don't do it anymore.
No.
And that's exactly what you're saying. I think it's like they either run out of ideas, or they run out of people, or they just run out of the love of it.
Yeah, because there's no money.
It's a job of work. I mean, it's work.
There's no money in it.
There's nothing. I can imagine James is now doing it. Because I'm in touch with James quite regularly, and he's kind of doing it. That's his thing now. It's full time.
That's his thing. Yeah.
As well as a bit of coach. He coaches CrossFit.
Yeah.
But that's after, I think he's got 600 40 episodes now. So he's
6 years deep, mate. Yeah,
established now. But I mean, it's taken 6 years.
Yeah.
But
and he was telling me that when he retired, he retired and he basically spent all of his pension trying to keep himself going, and then eventually transitioned when he had a few sponsors come on board after like 5 years, and that's what enabled him to keep going. Otherwise, he'd have had to sack it in.
Yeah, he gets some good people on there now. I think he's getting traction, so hopefully he'll just continue to grow and grow and grow. He's pretty unique what he does, and the reason the reason why I found you guys is because there are a few people like yourself and like James Adler who are quite entrepreneurial as well as being, in the fire service, a former fire service, and I find those people interesting, and it's a great place for me to start in trying to spread my message really in older age strength preservation. But I thought, why not kind of circle back to the cohort of people who I identify with most strongly, because I'm an osteopath, and I work in health promotion. I do lots of kind of projects for kind of think tanks and all that, but I still identify as a fireman, man, or a firefighter. I mean, that's me. I mean, I did 15 years. It's like, that's me. I'll go to my grave thinking, who do you feel? I can't do it anymore because of my injuries and stuff, but that's still me.
Isn't that so strange though? And I have that, especially as I speak to more and more frontline operators in general, but also firefighters. It's like, and I do a post about it every now and again. It's kind of a site we put out every couple of months because I think it's important to keep repeating it, is that you're more than just the thing you do. But the difference with the thing that we do and the thing that you've done and what you made, vast majority of your career, 15 years doing, is it's not something that get drawn to you for the money or anything like that. You do it because it's something visceral. It's something that is kind of stirred up within you and you just feel drawn to it. But then, and I'm conscious of it myself, that's why I didn't call it the Pete Wakefield podcast or anything like that, because this is just part of who I am. Because for a time, for me, I took masses of steroids and drugs and all that. I was like 24 stone, international strongman, all that sort of stuff. And I had made that who I was. That was like 90% of my personality. And when I got some great coaching and some great sort of support moving out of that, I started to become very conscious of not allowing that to happen in other areas of my life. Like you do, sometimes you see it with parents, and I'm going to stereotype there, but like with moms, where they think, I'm a great mom. And they're a great mom, but like that's not all you are. Do you know what I'm trying to say there? And I'm conscious of that with firefighters, because what happens, like for yourself, when you did do it for 15 years, it had become such a tremendous part of what you were doing. What was it like when you'd come to terms with the fact that those bay doors were closing for the last time, if you know what I mean? And or was there ever a thought of, okay, I'm dealing with this now, but I might get better, I might rehab, I might go back? Because you're still quite, I know you'll probably challenge me on this, but I feel like you're still quite young in the How old are you?
I'm 50.
50. So the average male you'll know better than me. How long does the average male live in the UK? I think it's 86, is it? A bit older now?
Yeah, well, we'll come on to that. I mean, with a fair wind, a bit of luck, if you've got doing all the right things, it's not unreasonable to say 95, believe it or not, and living well to 95. And that's kind of part of the message I wanted to get across today, is if you do the right things and if you make the right lifestyle choices, it's 80% within your control. And you could probably get to mid-90s and living well, not living badly, living with ill health. And then 20% of it is kind of, I would say 20% is out of your hands. Yeah. It's a little bit of luck, a bit of history if you have accidents and, industrial exposure to stuff and genetic predisposition. But there's 80% of it which is in your control. And I think
today's podcast was in partnership with our good friends Johnny and the team over at William Wood Watches. Now, if you're not familiar by now, William Wood was the name of his grandfather. He was a firefighter in the British Fire Service for over 25 years, stationed in Newcastle on the Blue Watch. Now, his grandson Johnny is a great friend of the podcast and came up with William Wood Watches to honour his grandfather and the legacy of firefighters all around the world. Now, some pretty cool updates from the William Wood Watch team. When it comes to their chivalrous collection, this August they came out with, honestly, one of my favourite looks for it. They came out with the gun metal for the face of the watch. Now, if you go over there and look at their watches, they've of course got the Jubilee, the Triumph, the Valium, the Bronze, but if you look at the chivalrous range, this is effectively the luxury dress range. It's got that sleek case, the luxury finish, and you can wear it on absolutely any occasion. I myself, I've said on the podcast before, I'm a massive fan personally of the Valiant collection. I've got the red watch, always with the red strap. Now, they do come with a selection of straps as well. And honestly, for me, the straps is probably one of the most favorite parts of it. It really is the one that catches everybody's eye. It's what draws you into it. And when you receive your William Wood watch, that whole unboxing experience is actually kind of special. Whether or not you get the fire alarm box or the VIP roll, usually comes, I think, with 3 different straps. However, I do know, I think it is if you get the Triumph collection, which is the Swiss precision watch made in Switzerland, you actually get that really unique fire alarm box as well that comes with it. Now that thing is absolutely stunning. You know the types you see in buildings where it says break glass on the front of it? That, honestly, it's been made into this luxury leather-bound box. You open that bad boy up, you see all the straps, you see the bottom compartment where you get the encasing watch. Pretty sure it comes with the cufflinks as well. And again, if you go over to their website, williamwoodwatches.com, you'll see that this company really does support firefighters all over the world. I think to date they are over £75,000 they've contributed to firefighter charities all over the world. So head on over and check it out. Have a look at the Chivalrous first. They've got a chocolate range on there, but for me, the gunmetal one, if you're going to have a look at the gunmetal, that looks absolutely fantastic. The Triumph is probably my favorite, and I'm saving up for that one at the minute, but I have got the Valiant collection myself, and I absolutely love it. Johnny and the team are really making some moves with William Wood watches, doing some great things for our sector. Now back to the show.
As I transitioned out of fire brigade, I mean, it was horrendous, man. I mean, it was horrendous. You know, the bay doors closing. Part of things happen, you know, but they won't ever, because, you know, it was a finite, you know, you're never going to be able to lift again, carry things, which is, you know, fundamentally we do a lot of lifting and carrying. The firefighter challenge is all about
just lift the
you
move.
know, carrying stuff up ladders, dragging dummies, and quite rightly, because that's a fundamental act. But I think for me, the hard thing about that was I was still relatively well. I was early 30s, mid 30s, and it was hard because I joined when I was 18.
Yeah.
And so
I'd grown up. Prime of your life.
Grown up. So I'd grown up within it. I mean, I don't think guys grow up really until they're about 45 anyway, to be honest.
I don't think I've grown up yet.
Anyway. I mean? So, you know, I was still a child when I left, you know, even when even though I had children at that point. But the reality is the thing I think that, you know, kicks you up the arse, really. You know, you have to be realistic eventually. You know, I was on morphine and gabapentin, and I had significant changes to my lumbar spine through a series of incidents and accidents that I had, a series of difficult lifts and rescues that I remember doing that I was never quite the same afterwards, but I wasn't hospitalized or medicalized through it. And then finally an injury where I slipped and fell, which was the final kind of thing for my back. And at the time, it was massively disappointing because, you know, I was on a watch where I was very happy, and, you know, we were real. It was quite a young watch, but in a good way. You know, I think it was one of those ones where you had a really good governor and a really good sub-officer who just let us do as much training as we wanted. I mean, physical training. We used to set up little assault courses with tractor tires, and we had sled pulls, and, you know, we were crossfitting before CrossFit. This is in the mid 90s. So we were crossfitting before CrossFit was a thing. And
CrossFit kind of tried to steal it with functional fitness, but yeah, CrossFit and functional fitness have been around. That's Spartan stuff, isn't it? Yeah, this is what gladiators were doing.
Totally.
Calisthenics and lifting and moving.
Exactly. Functional. Yeah, it's functional. I mean, we were lifting, we were kind of getting kit from one. So you were building an obstacle, and we say, right, let's get everything from one side to the other and time it. And then we're trying to beat, you know, 4-man crews trying to beat each other. And it's funny, isn't it? I was thinking about CrossFit the other day, actually, because I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I treat a lot of people who do CrossFit, especially middle-aged people who decide to have a midlife crisis and take up CrossFit, or Ironman, or blue-collar boxing, white-collar boxing. You know, it's like, okay, now you're doing that. That
scares me a lot. That scares me a lot.
Yeah. What? White-collar boxing?
Yeah, just because of the head trauma involved in it, to be honest with you, especially when people pick it up at such a late age. No, I don't think
I love the training. I love the training that goes. The training is second to none. I mean, back in the day, I did a bit of that. But as soon as you experience concussion, you know, unless you're really invested in it, then you realise actually this isn't a great lifestyle choice, and not to longevity anyway. But the actual training that goes into it is again, it's very functional, isn't it? Because you're hitting the bag, hitting the pads, you're doing burpees, press ups, running, swimming. Sometimes it's very, very cross training. It's the ultimate cross training, I think. It's like the expression of movement. But when I was thinking about CrossFit, it was interesting because we always did that sort of training. So you'd have the forces or the emergency services doing basically circuit training. Let's just call it that for now. But really functional stuff. And if you had enough environment and kit, you could do really interesting circuit training, like climbing ropes and going over obstacles, and then lifting weight, and then running around the gym. So it's CrossFit, but it's become its own thing now. It's become a sport in its own right, which is interesting. So basically, circuit training has become its own sport, and whereas we did it to get good functionally and be tactically ready for our jobs, that was what it was all about. Now it's a thing in its own right, and I find that fascinating.
There's part of you as well, though, and the first thing I got into, and I want us to recycle all the way back in a minute, but I just want to close on this before we move back, is I think it's probably more benefit than there is bad because I think a lot of people are getting some nasty injuries from CrossFit, but I came to CrossFit after doing years and years of strongman / bodybuilding / we epitomized and sort of held up the age of the giants, where everyone needed to get massive and get big arms and big shoulders, and we weren't functional, we weren't mobile. And I'm sure that's not all of the population, but that was more what we saw in the media. That's more what we glorified. And I remember going to recruit training and seeing all the juiced up monkeys with their tan and all that sort of jazz. I feel like CrossFit and the world of functional fitness has given more benefits than it has some of the chronic debilitating things that it's caused, because there's always a cost with everything that we do. But I feel like we're in a healthier place now, especially with all I see a lot more women engaging in things like functional fitness than ever did with the shiny plates in the gyms, which weren't really engaging the vast majority of the population.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Peter. I think it's a real meritocracy. I love the fact they can scale things for different ages. And the sexes, it's a welcoming place. I do like that. I think something has to change in regards to the gym culture. The gym culture that you're talking about is something I grew up in. I grew up in so I was a schoolboy in the 80s, and it was all about, bodybuilding. It wasn't about functional fitness at all.
Yeah. And
then when I became a recruit, that was a different story. I met some absolute machines that changed my perspective, which I'm happy to talk about. But
so where did you grow up?
So I was born in London. My dad was a London fireman. And and we moved to Kent in the 70s. So Medway Town's quite apparently the third worst place to live in the UK, apparently. But you don't know what you are, where you are until you're there.
London was rough back then as well, though. We've had some firefighters on from the 70s.
Oh God, Southwark Training Centre, the old training centre, that was rough. The actual centre was great. I loved it. It was an old Victorian workhouse, which is quite apt. But the actual journey to get from London Bridge to Southwark Training Centre, you took your life in your hands at 7 in the morning. You had the choice of going across a park, cut for 10 minutes, or you think, I've got to go through the park, because then when there are loads of junkies and winos there, it'd always kind of throw a bottle at you or something. It was just, and now it's all gentrified,
So why was the move to Kent? Because your father, he was a firefighter his whole career, wasn't he? Did he do anything else?
No. Well, he did a few bits of pieces when he retired, but he was stationed all over Southeast, and he was quite well known in the union as well. He did a lot of union work. But he did 30 odd years and then retired. Again, he joined when he was 18. So he was relatively young when he retired. He's still alive still. He's still enjoying his retirement, I think, playing golf. They still live in Kent. And growing up in that part of the world was quite deprived everywhere. I mean, I think the 70s was quite it was not, I think there's a lot of discontent, and strife, but so I think the schools there were just quite normal. It was just corralling people before you went off to where no one really went to do A levels, but no one really went to university or anything like that. It wasn't a very inspirational environment. But then
I feel like that's come kind of full circle-ish now as well, because like you say, in the 70s into the 80s there was, and I always talk to people about this, because like your father and yourself and people that joined in those ages, yes, we would argue they may or may not have had the great educational opportunities, but what they did have was great functional skills. They had the ability, like just when you were talking about walking across the park there, the ability for risk awareness and just your ability to have a bit of street savvy and your ability to build rapport with people. Those skill sets are ironically now what I feel like we're missing a little bit of, because after that came the age of universities and so-called opportunities, and everyone went off and got a degree. But again, in doing so, I feel like it cost us some of those general skills of, just having the ability to be more street smart and be more functional, know how to take your car to bits, working with your dad at the weekends, doing stuff. I feel like we then went through 20, 30 years, and maybe it's just getting worse now, where we didn't do as much of that. And now we have people coming into the services who maybe are significantly better educated, but can they get straight onto the drill ground and crack on with some of those, dexterity skills?
Yeah, I think it's harder for maybe some of that generation. I don't know. I do have some faith actually in the generation coming out. I've got an 18-year-old son. I've got two sons at 20 and 18, and I have faith in that generation because, certainly George, my youngest, is of that kind of generation you're talking about, is kind of quite tech savvy, but he's really mechanically minded. That's just very innate in him. I haven't had to teach him that. In fact, I'll be honest, he'll probably teach me stuff. He can look at a schematic and understand it, which is interesting to me. So I think given the experiences and training that I think if you put that generation in, I think the thing that would be a struggle is fitness for some of them.
Really?
But yeah, I do. Not for my sons. I'm talking about the generation. I think fitness would be a problem. I think the generations are unfitter as we go through history.
Well, I think we like to design efficiencies in life, don't we? We like to make things theoretically more efficient, but in doing so, you make it a little bit easier, and then you don't build that sort of callous in the body with going out and doing manual labor or living in houses that are slightly colder or having food that's not riddled with sugar. All of those things, and even sporting schools. I mean, what was it like when you were at school?
Yeah, we did a lot of it. It was brutal. We did a lot of cross country. And I mean, that's my point, is that I think in the modern age, I think a lot of the movement that we would have just done innately just to live, not particularly even to exercise or work, just to live, has been taken away. Everything's been mechanized. And that's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. Labor saving stuff is good. Yeah. I think it's partly why we're living longer, ironically, as the generation goes on. But I do worry about, the lack of physical education, physical training in general terms in younger generations coming up.
It's also for what that teaches you in other aspects as well, though, in like leadership, in like taking setbacks and things like that. That was a big part of what I took away from being part of teams when I was at school. So it's not just the physical aspect of it as well. It's everything that sport teaches you. Yeah,
I mean, there's so many lessons about life that sport teaches us, and I think that's why sport is such a big thing in our culture. Especially in our country, because when you think about, well, why is it people get so passionate about this? And I think it's because it's a reflection, it's a metaphor for life, isn't it? The hero's journey.
Yeah.
Or you pick yourself up and go again, and eventually you win. And it's the team and it's the leadership and all those lessons, which I think probably hark back to kind of our own evolution as a species. Where we band together. And we work together for a common goal. And in sport, that's winning a game or winning something, isn't it? But I think back in the day, and I think it really speaks to our evolutionary DNA.
What was your sort of sporting background? What did you do when you were a kid?
Oh man, I mean, I used to just be out on my bike all the time, and we used to build camps. It was quite, although it was quite a deprived area. Because it was deprived, made our own entertainment. So we used to play a bit of football, obviously, in the park, play a bit of cricket, and we used to I remember making camps and stuff, and going on long bike rides, stuff like that. My main interest, I wouldn't say I was particularly sporty. When I left school, I was 16, and I kind of did a few jobs. I got into outdoor pursuits quite quickly, so I was interested in climbing. Which was a bit of everyone was quite shocked by that, because there wasn't much climbing around there. But I was really into it, so I kind of joined an organisation called Fairbridge Drake, and then became one of their kind of trainers. So I did a little so I was an outdoor pursuits instructor before I joined the service, and I loved that because it was kind of, canoeing, rock climbing, hiking, and that stayed with me all my life. Actually, I've just come back from Wales this weekend, where I was with my 18-year-old George, and we did a bit of bouldering and a bit of hiking, and I still love the grind of that. And I think there's something I've always enjoyed, that kind of just being outdoors in nature more than the gym. Although I do enjoy and have spent long periods of time working in gyms as well, and working out personally. So I always will. But I think I spent a couple of years doing that. Then got a job in an organisation who were a private version of what was called the Salvage Corps. I don't know if you know about those, Pete, but the Salvage Corps was something that was disbanded in the 80s, I believe. Apologies if I'm wrong to anyone listening. But the Salvage Corps were basically, they'd go and do, they go and protect the property or shore it up or make sure it doesn't get any worse. So, basically after the emergency was over, they'd come in and try and save property. And there was a whole separate branch really of that. There would be uniformed exactly the same way, but they're a Salvage Corps. But these guys were disbanded, I think, in the 80s, and they set up a private company. So I worked with them for about a year before I was old enough to join the fire service. And that was interesting because it kind of got you a bit hands-on, as you say, a bit hands-on with some of the tools and some of the kind of, just using equipment, pumps and, just working at heights and stuff. In fact, my interview was ridiculous. I turned up in a pair of just kind of brogues and a suit. And this guy who was in charge said, okay, he's going to and it was basically an industrial unit in the middle of Medway Towns. And he said, right, so do you see that central narrow roof tile that runs a span of the roof? I said, yeah. He said, right, I want you to climb up on that ladder. I want you to walk along that and walk back. And if you can do that, then you've got the job. And this is about 40 foot. Right? And I'm thinking, you're mad. And this has been a theme, actually. So I've had some near misses with heights more than anything over my career. But this is where it started. I thought, Jesus. And I didn't, being naive, I just got up there in these flat, smooth shoes and walked up, turned around, came back. And he said, right, yeah, okay, start on Monday. And that was it. But yeah, when I went back and told my parents, my dad went mad. I think he went
Didn't give you no PPE. No, I mean, there was obviously but nobody thought about harnesses or anything back then. But it was just, I mean, shimmy along the ridge tiles for us.
I never really experienced much PPE apart from obviously BA and fire gear. I mean, in terms of harnesses, technical rescue stuff, that didn't really come in my time. I mean, the only thing we had those big turntable ladder belts with the big hooks on them and carabiners, but apart from that, it wasn't really a thing that we were issued.
Jesus. So that was literally it. That was your entry into the fire service.
No, that was entry into I was about 17 at that point, so that was like a private version of Salvage Corps. I did that about a year, which again got me used to working shifts. It was nights and days. And then I applied when I was 17 to the fire brigade. And I wrote in the letter, I'm really keen to join, and I'm too young, but please consider. And they quite liked the initiative and let me in. And basically, I think I turned 18 in January, and I was in Southwark Training Centre at 19. No, sorry, in February. Yeah, I think I joined on
your dad obviously wanted you
19th.
To go in and do it, because some people have different feelings as they go through their career. And I think there's only been 1 or 2 episodes where I've asked people if they do it all over again. Pretty much 98% have said yes, but there's that 2% which have gone, you know what, I don't know if I'd encourage somebody to go in and do it again these days. And that is a very, very, very small number of people. But your dad had obviously had a positive experience through his whole career.
I wouldn't say that, actually. Looking back, I think my dad was pretty affected by what he did. I think he's, I'm very aware of some of the things he did. He was that generation where, it was hardly any protective gear, using hook ladders and wheeled escape ladders to rescue people. He was involved with quite a famous fire in London where I think it was a Lannister Gate Hotel fire in the 1960s, 63, where they rescued 50 people, and it was real rescues. It wasn't just it was hook ladders and turntable ladder and wheeled escape ladder, and But for all those ones that you hear about where they get commendations, he did 30 years.
Yeah.
And this is in the days of paraffin lamp heaters and all sorts of things where there were multiple fires all the time. So he never talks about, he very rarely talks about it. And he didn't talk about it. It was just a concept to me when I was growing up. In fact, I would say that he probably wasn't that keen for me to join, if I'm being perfectly honest. He certainly didn't give me any help.
Really?
He kind of was, when I got in, he was kind of saying, okay, well, it's up to you now. You've got to find your way. And I think he was alluding to, I think he was struggling with his own demons at that point, because I got in as he retired. And, he had his own journey, so to speak. But I certainly have a great deal of respect for that generation.
Hey folks, just wanted to jump in with a quick piece around firefighter health and wellbeing. Now, we get a lot of messages and emails into the podcast around firefighter health and fitness, whether you are trying to join the fire service and pass them tricky fitness tests, if you are currently serving, or if you are coming up to that next chapter of your life, retiring from the emergency services. We get so many different questions around it. So in partnership with Fitness for the Frontline, we have come up with a series of guidance and programs specifically designed to reflect the physical elements of the role of a firefighter. So whether it's carrying an LPP across an overgrown field, lifting a ladder above your head under running it, or wrestling with cutting gear for 30 plus minutes at some kind of complicated RTC, our bodies are required to lift, push, and carry objects in very specific circumstances. That is effectively what Fitness on the Frontline focuses on, as well as the longer term aspects of overall health and wellness for our firefighters. There are focuses around strength endurance, and overall conditioning, all achievable and relevant to our roles. Now, we are definitely not about to be smashing out world records or getting that beach body ready in 6 weeks rubbish. The systems and programs that we put in place are adjusted for people's current fitness levels, and they're not a prescriptive weight or a one-size-fits-all BS. We also take into consideration all the fitness testing for initial application, and also for current firefighters who want to maintain and progress their fitness levels. It is very likely for myself personally that I'm still going to be a firefighter when I'm 60 plus, so longevity in the role is really important to me, and I know it is for so many people out there. The system has a built-in ability to adjust easily depending on the equipment you have available, your fatigue levels, or if you're coming off busy ass night shifts and you haven't got a lot of time to work out. You can record your results, log your weights, your body measurements. We've got all the facilities to do that. The system is yours to use how you want to train. We've taken all the fluff and the gimmicks and the BS away from most of the rubbish that you see out there. And this is designed by experienced operational firefighters and qualified people, including myself, with members of the team available to contact throughout the time you are within us in the program. If you ever get stuck, if you're starting to struggle, and also to celebrate those wins and achievements with you. It all starts with no obligation, 7 days worth of the programming, absolutely free. So whether you're joining, serving, or looking at the next chapter in your life, have a glance in the link for the podcast. Fitness for the Frontline is designed by firefighters for firefighters. Now back to the show.
Probably busier in terms of real fires than our generation will ever be, thankfully. But they
didn't have the resources. They didn't have the support.
They didn't.
The kit was just archaic.
Yeah, they didn't have the resources, and they didn't have the what health and safety we have. They didn't. And the union of that's what the union have been. I think love them or hate them. I think the union are needed because a lot of the battles that they fought have been on behalf of people like that. Who have put better health and safety, better kit, and just pushed for maybe more time off. And I think time in particular to rest and recover and get over sleep deprivation is massively important to long-term health.
That was the biggest part.
But I think so. So that was him. And so when I got in, a bit of a rude awakening, if I'm honest, Pete, because I was quite because at 18, yourself, like you might think you're fit and strong, but you're not mature, you're not a man.
You've got all these new bodily functions and muscles and all these, you look like the outline of a grown up, but you're still such a child in so many ways, I always felt.
Yeah, I mean, stamina takes, and real strength, I think, takes into your mid 20s, sometimes into 30s, to really get able to really to be able to really work at a high level. And I think I found out that on day one, really. Day one, it was we did a 6 month. I think it was just under 6 month training, and it was hard. I mean, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Now, thing is, I'd still say it's the hardest thing I've ever done, because I've done ultra endurance events subsequently. I was a competitive rower at a very high level, and rowing is no joke. That's all about suffering.
Mate, rowers are always the empty things at the gym. I was on the row this morning and I just did 500 meter splits.
Yeah.
I was the only person on like 10 rowers. People stay away from them. They suck.
I spent 10 years on one of those things, and it's like hard functional exercise. But I think having reflected back, as you do when you get to my age, you think, that was the hardest thing I've done, but not necessarily because it was it was hard exercise. Actually, it was brutally hard exercise and brutally hard drill training, hose running, all about that. It's like this something that looks so simple with fire gear becomes brutal, and then breathing apparatus, drills, heat and humidity, real fire training, brutal. And as an 18-year-old on an 18-year-old's body with not much kind of stamina yet, it kind of it broke me down, and I'll hang in there, and I managed to, but I remember I didn't really enjoy recruit training until right at the end, where I'd got out because of that more than anything. But I look back on it, I was proud of that, because it was pretty hard. And we, it was old school PT as well. We had, it was climbing ropes, it was circuit training. So
I was going to say, what would a standard day look like? Did they still do morning PT? Because they stopped doing that in like the late, maybe the early 2000s. You see some stuff at the college. They didn't do morning. They didn't make people go for runs anymore and all that. And I think that was a bad decision.
We did. It was all parade grounds. It was proper parade, militaristic parade every morning. Inspected by the commandant. You had parade officers who come around and kind of ask you technical questions. But then if your kit wasn't up to scratch, this is like your number one uniform. If your shoes weren't balled up, you're out there standing to attention at lunchtime with no lunch. That's the reality.
I love that.
You're standing there to attention for an hour. You didn't get any lunch.
But again, isn't that so sad that we've stopped doing that? And again, like,
I don't know about the lunch thing.
Wow, mate. Yeah, but you weren't going to die, were you? You weren't going to die from missing one lunch. And people always worry about the one person. Oh, it happened to, and I'm not saying any of this was satire, but like, it happened to the one person who was diabetic, and then they got really ill, or maybe they died, and then we all stopped doing it. But I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because you are trying to build a resilient person. And I know you do so much work in physical and mental resiliency. I just don't want to lose too much of that. Like, you've taken on the mantle to do that as a parent, which is great. And I've got 3 children, and I try and do those bits the same. I'm sure I fail on a daily basis, but we've all just got to keep pushing. But I don't want to lose all of that through fears of health and safety or mental fragility or do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think what they were doing, I understand what they were doing. They were instilling discipline, and they only had so much time to do it. So it was like, if you don't follow the rules, this is a consequence. So it's cause and effect. If someone lets you down as a team member, the whole team suffer. So that's a very relevant life lesson, isn't it?
Yeah.
So although it was unpleasant at the time, as you say, no one died. It was a bit. It sucks a bit when you stand there in the rain, but I remember it well. And I mean, the PTIs were a very different animal. They were old school. They all trained at order shots. They trained with the army, so basically they're army PTIs. So we just got beasted, and it did break it down and build you up. We did runs with telegraph poles down the Albert Embankment all through the parks in London, and we did circuit training endlessly. We did old school assault courses, climbing rope, climbing over obstacles. We did a circuit called the Filthy 15 and the Dirty Dozen, which is just old school circuits, and it gets you fit very quickly. But I think that kind of training stays with you. It was very formative for me, because I'm still a big fan of that kind of circuit training. And as I say, I think those sorts of concepts have morphed into what we now see in gyms and in CrossFit and any functional training. The training we were doing, the typical day was with parade. I think it was about 8 a.m. parade, and then you would have. I think you'd have a typical day would be a technical lecture from your instructor. Would be something you might be doing pumps and pumping and some technical stuff, or you name it really. And then you'd have a practical session, which would be, drilling. So you'd, in the early days, up until about week 9, you weren't allowed to use BA. You had to pass, I think, your intermediate exams, if I'm remembering this correctly. You had to do things like knots and lines and pumps and pumping, and the hydraulic equipment. And then you pass your exam, and then you do your BA course, which is a 2-week course. And then you'd bring BA into everything you did. So then you'd start being more fun. So even the drills became more functional. So you'd drive up in a fire engine and you'd have a scenario, which, you'd take turns to be pump operator, BA, control, or the officer in charge. And then you'd have a crew or 2 crews. So it was really functional, really, really good. And we'd do that every day. And then you'd have PT at least 3 or 4. It wasn't every day, but it was 3 or 4 times a day. A week you'd have PT, and man, it was pretty intense. And my instructor, Dave Smith, massive respect, very formative experience of meeting him, because you realise very quickly, everyone realised. I mean, I was the youngest in the squad, and there's a lot of ex-services who joined who had that advantage of having been through something like this and having had the maturity in physicality to kind of handle it a bit better than probably I was. But Dave Smith put them in their place as well. We just said, okay, he would do everything with us. He would do all the PT. He loved it. He was a real machine when it comes to that. And he took us into the neighbouring station, which was Southwark, still an operational station. And he had to have lessons in everything. We don't know how to go down a pole first time. So he gave us a lesson on how to go down a fireman's pole. But then he went hand over hand up the pole without using his legs.
Jesus.
And he said, right, okay, guys, who can do that like that? And he just challenged. There was a guy who was an international karate guy, and in our squad, so properly athletic and fit, and he can do it. And I was thinking, wow,
no legs.
No one could do it.
He didn't use his legs.
No legs, no, just almost like a plank. Like when you see a gymnast, just up he went hand over hand. And as it transpired, he said he was from he was an old school station officer from Poplar in London, and that's was a really busy station. And you think he'd tell stories about the things that they used to have to do, and how a floor collapse was on the hose reel, and the only thing that saved him was he had such a grip on the hose reel that his crew he was dangling over kind of a 2-story drop into a building. He was just clamped onto this hose reel, and they pulled him up. He had such, I was thinking, that's when strength is important, isn't it? That literally saved his life. And he used to make a point of saying he doesn't believe you're fit unless you can run a marathon in under 3 hours and bench press 300 pounds within the same kind of week. Because you don't just start do a marathon and then you train for a year and do that. You've got to do both of them within a short space of time. And if you do that, then you're part of the club. And I never managed that.
No, that's 100. That's like 140 kilo bench press. That's a serious amount of weight.
It's serious. It's strong, and and that's an elite level club runner, I would argue.
Yeah.
As well. So usually
I do think that though. I'm trying to get more towards that now. I alluded to earlier, I got up to like 24 stone when I was trying to do ridiculous things. And I was colossally strong and all that sort of craziness. But I felt like I'd actually lost some of the basic, what I now see as like, and I'd love your thoughts on this. I know we're sort of skipping forward, but like some of the basic human tests. Like if you're in trouble or you need to get somewhere, like if one of your sons or whatever is in trouble at school and it's 3 miles away or it's a mile away, could you just run there? Do you know what I mean? Every member of the public, could you just run to your child? They're around the other side of some lake. They're up a hill. Could you run to get them? If you're in danger, could you climb over a wall? Could you lift your own body? Could you physically lift yourself over something? And can you swim? I mean, I feel like there are 3 fundamentals that every human being should be able to do. And I lost the ability to just run 5 miles at the drop of a hat when I was like 24 stone. And I feel I wonder how many members of the community, the public, can even do that now. I mean, you speak to so many people in the work that you do now. If we just transition for a second, I don't want to come back to so many things, but like, do you think they're still necessary things, and how far away from that do you think we are as Even to be honest, mate, even in the emergency services, I see some people. I'm like, I don't think you could lift your own body weight.
I actually think it's. I think that handling your own body weight and being able to do those fundamental things, as you say, like, could you run to get somewhere quickly? Could you climb over a wall? Could you lift yourself up off the floor? And let's break it down and scale it back to an older population where you say, can you get out of the chair? You know, can you get up the stairs? Can you get off the toilet? All these things, it's all relative to your stage of life. But I think when you talk about firefighting, and I do believe that I wouldn't be surprised there were in my time people who probably couldn't do a pull-up or a dip. And that to me is a bit of a worry, really, not only for the people that are potentially going to be there to protect, but for their own long-term health. Because I think if you haven't got the fundamental baseline of strength and actually power, which we should come on to, because I think it's power that you can develop, which is a thing that saves you. The thing is, with power, you've all been in situations where you step off a curb and you have to recorrect it before you twist your ankle. That instant acceleration of strength, so that acceleration and intent to correct in a split second, is power. That's an everyday example of what power is. And if you don't train specifically, you don't have the baseline strength first, then you haven't got enough power to do that. And that's why you see people stepping off curves and breaking their ankle, or falling down something and not being able to put their hand out to protect themselves, and so they hit their head. And this is all power. This is a very basic example of that. But in the fire service, an example would be, well, power is more relevant for the fire service more than most professions. I think armed services as well. But it's about that unknown. It's about the chaos of situations and the unknown movement and unknown situations, unpredictable situations you might find yourself in, where, for instance, a floor collapses. And you're doing your sweep and stamp, and your weight's on the rear leg. Do you have enough power if something goes in front of you to pull back in time? And so even those basic principles takes leg strength, takes core strength, takes coordination, takes neuromuscular communication and proprioception to do, and all of which, if you leave it and you just become let's face it, become less active and not motivated to do your training, then if you're ever, heaven forbid, you're in that situation, but you become a cropper. Whereas if you trained, you might come out the other side of it. And it's strength, and this is fundamentally the message I'm trying to spread to as many people, but especially in the fire community, is because it is literally relevant to coming out the other side of a situation. Whereas if you leave it, you might not come out the other side without an injury or worse. And I think it's massively important to talk about what strength is, to talk about and to reflect on one's personal exercise habits, to make sure that it's embedded into your normal activities, because it's very easy just to do aerobic. There's an overemphasis, I think, in this country, and there will be an overemphasis in most cohorts, but there's an overemphasis to do aerobic type conditioning, which has its place in metabolic health. It has its place, and it is massively important for cardiovascular health, diabetes, cancer prevention, etc.
Give me a bit of coaching then, buddy, because I only ever run a maximum of like 5 miles. I never run more than 5 miles because I've lost like 6 stone, but I'm still 18 stone. It's a lot for my shins if I run any further than that. And when we said about that, could you just quickly run if you needed to now? I feel like my way to honor that is, can I run 5 miles? Okay, if I can run 5 miles, fine. And then I'm going to use the rest of my training capability for that day to apply it to some more functional strength, to some balance work, to some explosive work. Am I doing too much? What's the average sort of distance? Yeah. Because like you said, it's got so many positive indicators, but we don't. Not everybody needs to do an ultramarathon like you've done.
Yeah, no, I used to do. It wasn't so much ultramarathon running I was doing ultra distant rowing. So I was never a runner. I'm the same as you. I've never really you've got to look at your body type first and foremost, Pete. You've got to look at your build, your morphotype, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Mm-hmm. So you've got the three main kind of types of build morphology you could be. And again, you've got to look at your genetic inheritance of skeletal structure as well, and look at, there are certain activities that your body is going to be more suited to than others. And that's just a fact. So for you, and for potentially someone like myself, running isn't going to be a natural thing. It's going to be a challenge, but a challenge is a good thing. But I wouldn't say you should go and do an Ironman or an ultra marathon. I would say, 5K, 10K regularly, or I wouldn't even give yourself a distance. I would say a certain time with a heart rate at a certain level. Give yourself permission not to have to focus on the distance, but just look at the heart rate and know what that means in terms of conditioning, looking at your aerobic base training and then looking at occasionally taking a bit higher and doing sprints is I think a logical way to approach cardiovascular training, unless you are an athlete. In terms of our job, my former job and your job now, it is about having a little bit of everything. I think it's about being able to perform quickly. It's about being able to have some stamina and to be able to carry, lift, drag, but also to be able to sustain that for an hour, or longer. But going back to your typical day that you described, I think probably is too much. Yeah, I would say if you're going to do a 5-mile run, I would spend the rest of the day doing some stretching and making sure my nutrition was on point. And I probably wouldn't do anything too heavy that day. Again, I would try and space it out. If I was going to do things in combination, I would put it into an actual circuit where you've got a little bit of running around us. The typical circuit where you'd have a workstation, then you'd do like a 20-meter run and come back to the workstation. But I think there is some evidence to suggest that if you do quite intense, aerobic, anaerobic work during a run or a row or whatever it might be, or an attack bike, then probably isn't the best time to then go and do a separate power or strength session, because you'll be fatigued. And you'd be in trouble I would then go into overtraining, and then you're going to get an excess of inflammation and free radicals in the blood. And there's a lot of research to suggest that actually that can be a negative effect upon one's muscle fibers. So, we call it overtraining in sporting worlds, and it's overtraining in tactical athletes as well as sporting athletes. I think industrial jobs, and when you look at why aren't builders the fittest kind of crossfitters? Why aren't they held up as these exemplars of ultimate human condition? It's because they're doing that kind of heavy, probably sub-maximal, but heavy loading, 10 hours a day, every day. Yeah. Sometimes 6 days a week, without the ability to rest and recuperate. The blood pressure's up, the blood glucose is probably up. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that it actually causes an excess of inflammation and free radicals in the blood, which means that you're more likely to have atherosclerosis and heart disease. And that's overtraining in an occupational sense.
Mate, my dad ran a building firm for 40 years, and so many people in that industry, I knew so many of them. We had them around the house, I'd go to meetings and stuff, just chronic injuries everywhere, plasterers, bricklayers. It wasn't good. And I had that same, one thing always amazed me was grip strength. Grip strength was unbelievable. Yeah. Some of the people, where they could just pinch something like 15, 20 bricks, I don't know what it was, and their ability to do that was always impressive, but there was always a massive cost to it. And also the lifestyle isn't great. The sleep, the rest, the nutrition is often horrific in a lot of labor industries, I think. Yeah,
I agree. And I think, we've got to take the lessons learned from the research that has been done, in that, overtraining is overtraining. Wherever you're doing it, your body doesn't know. Your body itself, the unconscious part of your body, doesn't know what you're doing. It just means, Jesus, I'm on a hamster wheel here again, and it breaks it down. Anyone who's run a marathon or done any long-term, long distance endurance stuff knows that for a week afterwards, you're feeling pretty broken. And there's a reason you're feeling broken. It's because you've overtrained. You've consciously set out to challenge yourself in that way, which is great. Don't do it. I would say don't do it too often, because there is a paradox in sport as well that you can become, there's an addictive quality to it, which we all know. If we've exercised, we all know there's an addictive quality to how we feel afterwards. And that's good. But then if you don't give yourself time to rest, and you don't alter and vary what you do, then that relationship then can start to break the body down. And instead of living longer, I would argue that you're probably going to have an injury, and you're not going to, benefit your longevity chances just through sheer build-up of, scar tissue, blood pressure starts to go. All the things you think exercise does in benefit you, actually the opposite can happen if you overdo it. So there's a dose-response relationship that we need to be mindful of in exercise.
Help me there, dude. So you're literally speaking to the choir, because like I've alluded to several times, it's like I'm a recovered addict, so I used to take all sorts of stuff. But I know, having speak to a lot of addicts, that you never stop being an addict. You just cross-addict. You just addict to something else. And fitness is a very common one for smokers, for drinkers, for substance abusers and all that sort of stuff. What can I do that isn't always training? Because I run in the mornings and I try and swim sometimes other times of the week, but I'm in the gym every single day, and I feel like if I don't wake up with something, and this is a really bad anchor, this is a really bad connection I've made. If I don't wake up aching, I feel like I don't deserve my breakfast. I feel like I'm a failure. I feel like I'm a hypocrite. How can I work on that?
It's, what, Pete, I've been there, man. It's such a common trait, I think, and I see it a lot and hear it a lot in anyone in uniform as well, because I think, people are drawn to this sort of job who are naturally quite physical beings, and I was as well. And I think the best way to answer that is to kind of tell you how I dealt with mine. In that, I think firstly one has to reframe life slightly, and that isn't a there's no quick fix to this, Pete. I think it's a process. It took me years, and I think you've always got to. I think the first thing to do is to, if we think of ourselves as merely physical beings, and we equate success to just being a physical thing or a physical task thing which we achieve, then I get that. But it's a dangerous game we play, because if you then get injured, and I've listened to some of your other podcasts, there's really, really great people on there where they've been injured, and it's a real challenge. I identify because I've been there. It's a dangerous game, because if we just identify as a physical being, then as we age, as we become old, as we can't do the same things we used to do for whatever reason, then it starts to become a battle you can't win, as opposed to a journey that you embrace. And I think that for me, what helped was getting different enjoyment out of different things. That dopamine response that we will get from exercise and endorphins, you can get that from different things. I think one needs to have time to rest and recover, because in my experience of working with people who've been injured, often if you're an elite athlete and you have an enforced layoff, they'll come back and set a PB because their body has had time to rest. We're in this state, we're on a hamster wheel often when we're in a state of chronic training, where we're not quite overtraining, but we're certainly not undertraining. And I would say that it's better, if you're going to make a choice, to be slightly undertrained than overtrained, because you can never be spot on. Because when you're overtrained, you get all those inflammatory markers and raised blood pressure and potentially interrupted sleep patterns. And what we're doing, when you think about it logically, what are we trying to achieve with that? We're actually hurting ourselves. So for me, if it was more about trying to develop more knowledge about such things, and I was always interested in this sort of thing. So I went down a line of education. So I went into really trying to understand, what I was doing primarily for me, so I could be ironically, so I could circle back and be a better physical performer. But then I realized in time, I think you realize that it's not the physical. You are an outward expression of yourself, of your psychological and neurological self. And when you engage with that, when you start to talk to other people who've been through injury and recovery, and when you speak to people who have had issues with addiction in the past and come through it, they all have a similar journey where you have a moment or a series of moments when you start to look outside of that box you find yourself in. I think that's part of, I have to say, I think that's part of, the human condition, and that I think growth and development is good, but not only in the physical. So for me,
what were your physical setbacks? Take us back, because you had.
I'm sorry?
And what were your physical setbacks? Because I know you had several phases. Yes. Take us back through your career and when you first started to think, well, hang on a minute, this I can see where this might be going. I need to address this.
I think so. I remember there were a couple of rescues that awkward lifts and things where I was carrying someone up a spiral staircase two of us were attempting to do it on a stretcher, and I remember after that my back being sore and niggly for some time, and I kind of tried to stretch it out and had some treatment, but it was never quite the same again. And then a series of events just led to me feeling soreness in my back at work. So it got to the point where even the bowling out hose was difficult. But I never really sought any professional advice. I think I saw physio a few times later on, but it was kind of I knew that something was changing. This was in my early 30s. But I hadn't had any sciatic pain or any discal symptoms to suggest that I had any strain in the lower discs. And then I slipped and fell. So I fell at work, and I was a twisting. It was nothing really. And often when I see people, they say, "Oh, I coughed," or "I picked up a pencil off the floor and my disc went." And actually, it's true. It can happen sometimes spontaneously, but generally, it's because of potentially something that you aren't doing, or something you're doing too much of, that's led to a strain pattern in that area. But anyway, for me, the final straw was a fall that I had, and had then prolapsed the two lower discs in my spine, and all the scans suggested that it wasn't something that would respond well to surgery, but it wasn't something that would get better in a hurry. Such was the severity of it. And at that point, I was off sick and on morphine, and I'd had injections, and someone was offering to do a spinal surgery, but they said it's like 50-50 whether we do more harm than good. So I kind of left it. And at that point, the brigade was saying, well, look, we haven't really got any non-operate. They weren't really redeploying people to non-operational. And I kind of lingered on for a little while, but then I was medically discharged. And that was tough. Because I was relatively young still.
Yeah.
In my mind, but this is what I was alluding to, Pete, in that you define yourself in a certain way. You identify in uniform. You have a role to play which you're proud of, and fundamentally, it's a physical role, and that was all taken away. So, for me, I had to kind of rebuild from the ground up.
What conversations, did you have with your partner? Were you with your partner then? What were you guys? Because obviously, when you were having these doctor's appointments, when you were having these consultations and these discussions, one of you must have started to have that. What does this look like if I'm not doing this anymore? What would my life be? What would I do? How did that work?
Yeah, well, it was, it's interesting because I met a few people at the time that were kind of the real sliding door moments where I went for some treatment with a guy. So before I left the fire brigade, I'd already kind of changed tack slightly. So before I was injured, I'd done a master's degree. I decided to go back to, well, I hadn't been to university. I decided to do a bit of education. I challenged myself a bit and managed to do a master's degree in exercise and health.
Wow.
At St Mary's University in Twickenham, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I met some good people on that, and I finished that. And so I was friendly with a guy on that course who was an osteopath, and he said, "Look, come along. I've heard you've been injured. Come along." And had a long chat with him. And he said, "Look, Dave, you know that you're not going to be able to lift anything awkwardly ever again. You might be able to exercise again eventually, but the reality is that you're going to do." And I'll tell you what, the other thing really made me realize the finality of not being back in uniform was I went to the Firefighters charity place in Harkham House in Devon, and I went for a couple of weeks there, and the physio there was really good, really matter of fact, but quite sensitive to the fact that, you know, she knew where I was, and she was the first person to really say, "Look, you're not going to be going back. That's it. And what you've got to concentrate on now is, you know, getting your health, you know, back to the point where you can exercise again." And that combination, and then speaking to my friend who was the osteopath, and I decided that, you know, actually I'm really interested in the body, always have been, always will be. And so I decided to give it a go to train as some kind of therapist, because I thought, why not? But yeah, that's where my journey into really understanding rehabilitation happened, because I kind of threw myself into rehabilitation, studying amongst people who were real experts in their field, first and foremost to help myself initially. I mean, I was on morphine and then gabapentin and codeine, and then finally weaned myself off after about 5 years.
5 years?
It was about the time that I then qualified. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because it was...
What's your thoughts on pain medication like that? Because it's intense stuff. And is it a solution, or is it a part of the path towards the solution, or how do you see it now?
It's a path. Yeah, it's a path, because I mean, I think I know I was on it for too long, but that's what the doctors wanted to do, because at that point I had something called neuropathic pain, which was where the sciatic nerve had been pressed on for so long that it left an imprint on the nerve itself. Wow. And which means that in the absence of a historic injury, you know, so the inflammation around the discal matter that had come out had been absorbed by the body. And so if you scanned it, there wouldn't be anything there, but the nerve itself had been imprinted upon. And so every time, you know, certain movements, you'd have raging kind of back pain and leg pain and spasm. And it was a neurological circuit that built up in the local spinal segment itself. So the medication initially was warranted, I think, but then
that's
I think
crazy. Is that the same? And I'm fishing here, but is that the same sometimes as, you know, when, and I know you'll know what it is probably, but when somebody has chronic leg pain or they have chronic arm pain and then they have it amputated, but they still feel the pain?
Phantom limb pain. Yeah, it's a similar principle.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a similar principle where you, where the pain is felt in the nervous system, even in the absence of the limb or the injury. Yeah, and it is a phenomenon that happens because what we know now is that pain is felt in the brain and nervous system. It's not, you know, so if you hit your thumb with a hammer, yeah, you can see it, and you know there's an injury there, but you're actually feeling it via your nervous system. It's your nervous system that your thumb, you know, the nervous system is part, you know, so we're this organism and every cell in the body has a nerve ending in it. But so, you know, you're feeling it. If it's working right, you're feeling it in your brain. If that thumb is constantly injured, if you do it again and again and again, then what will happen is that pathway becomes imprinted upon, and you have like a semi-permanent alert system that happens, so that actually your thumb might be absolutely healed, there's no tissue damage anymore, but you've still got that imprint, so that even if you move your thumb, or you don't even have to move your thumb, you have the intention to move your thumb, you'll have pain.
Dude, isn't that fascinating? That honestly, that just blows my mind. It's like the whole body is just like a feedback system. Like, because, and I try, totally, I can't really articulate it very well, but you're so right. It's like your body doesn't actually feel, it doesn't feel anything. You can drive things through parts of your body, and locally, it's not really doing anything because it's just a system. It's just blood and muscle and bone and things that are trying to work in synergy, and something's just interrupting it. But it's not experiencing pain. It's like your body's created this incredible system. And is there something as well? I'm going off on a tangent. I always do that. But like, what makes me believe this so much is not only obviously because we feel pain, but like, you know, when you have a nightmare and your mind creates pain, it creates an emotional pain or a physical pain, and you believe it, and you wake up with those palpitations, with your sweating, with your to you it's real, it's happened, but it didn't happen, and that is, I don't know if there's any connection there at all, but I'm like, it fascinates me. I don't fully understand it, obviously, nowhere near to the extent you do, but absolutely, it just fascinates me, the body that way.
Yeah, I mean that's and I think. And we still don't fully understand everything, Pete. That's a fascinating thing. I mean, understanding pain and understanding the nervous system, we still don't know everything. And I think there is we still don't know what human consciousness truly is. And I think that's what fascinates me when you get into really understanding the human condition, and when you look at the physical condition, you then very quickly start to realize that it's neurological. And then you start to realize that the neurological system is the bridge between the psychological and the physical. So there's that bridge between the two. And I think what I found helped me is that, I started looking at movement-based practices. I started looking at so put it like this. If you think of pain, there's an upward pathway. If you let's use the thumb as an analogy again, there's an upward pathway from the thumb up the arm, into the spinal cord, up the cord, and into a section of the brain, which says, okay, there's something going on here. And then there's a reciprocal relationship going down to make you drop the hammer. You'll grasp your thumb. You'll do something in a very innate reflex. So there's that pathway. So that pathway is there to protect us. And the thing is about the primitive nervous system, and we talk about the pain system now, is the primitive nervous system is not good at listening, Pete. It will not just, get better by itself. It is determined to hang on in there, because the primitive system is primitive. You can't talk your way out of a lot of these things. Talking therapy is fantastic for a lot of things, but when it comes to things like pain and neuropathic pain, and to a certain extent anxiety is mediated in the same part of the brain, then you find yourself a bit lost, because you think, well, I know consciously that that things are better now, but the nervous system feels like there's a threat. So the primitive nervous system is not good at listening, and it's not good at being logical. What it's good at is telling you you're hungry, telling you that when there's a threat, telling you when you're feeling tired, and the thing it does also mediate, though, and the thing that you can calm the primitive nervous system, and therefore things like anxiety and pain, is movement. So movement is the most primal thing of all. And I think when you start to get your head around, okay, so if I can move that limb in a way that doesn't trigger pain, eventually what will happen is that imprint, there's a pathway there. But I'm going to create another pathway around that. And eventually that becomes preferred route, but it takes hours and hours and hours and hours. Pain is, if you're exposed to pain in the long term, it's like a skill you really don't want to learn, but you can't help but learn it. You become an expert in feeling pain. You become more adept at feeling pain. Your system is all about making it easier for you as an individual to feel pain, as opposed to the person who hasn't been exposed to it. And with any skill, that's mediated via learning in the nervous system. And so what you have to do is retrain that nervous system via movement that doesn't cause pain. So that's why mirror box therapy is really effective. So, if I had an upper arm, upper limb injury that was neuropathic, or a lower limb injury which is neuropathic, mirror box therapy is fantastic, because your brain looks at don't know if you know about mirror box therapy, where, so if you had an injured hand, you put your hand into a box, but you'd put a mirror on one side of the box and put your other hand opposite it, so that you get a reflected image of the hand that's in the box.
I've not seen
So you
that,
move
but
the
I know
unaffected up.
the
Yeah.
when military personnel have seen research around when they injure one leg and the differences
Yes.
between continuing to train the other leg versus those that stayed sedentary. And I know there's probably a
Yes.
wider conversation around the whole body and
No,
bloodstream
that's a really
as well.
interesting point, Pete, because you get a contralateral benefit. So we do that in rehab all the time, where if you've got an injured right ankle ligament, train the left, because you'll get a bilateral improvement in both ligaments. Yeah.
And mirror
But
box stuff is
with mirror
fascinating
box,
because your
yeah,
body
it is. So mirror box,
Sorry, go on, yeah.
yeah. So mirror box therapy, your brain would perceive and accept very quickly that actually it's not your left hand. So it's not your reflected image. It's your injured left hand that's moving, and blimey, it's not hurting when I'm moving. But actually, your left hand is in that box and it's not moving. The reflected image of your right is moving. But very quickly, your brain gets its head around the fact that actually, I accept that. I accept that my left hand is moving and it's not hurting. And through moving it, through the illusion of moving it, your nervous system starts to calm down, and you start to build new pathways, and you start to defacilitate that hyper-aroused pain system. And that's purely because you're basically creating an illusion of movement. But I think more powerful than that is actually being able to properly move people without causing pain. So getting people unweighted in the water, hydrotherapy, or just the pool. I know the Firefighters charity have got one of these pieces of kit, but you get 0G treadmills. You've seen those?
Dude, Ivan Linton, we've just had him on the podcast, right? He's a firefighter from Lincolnshire, and he was one of the MotoGP, one of the TT riders. He's won over in Dublin or whatever it is. Yeah, Isle of Man, sorry. He's won, God knows how many times he won that, and he had a fatal crash where one of the other riders died. There was like 6 of them or something involved in it, and he lost the ability to walk. He had massive brain hemorrhage, he had spinal issues, he had a collapsed lung, and chronic issues in one of his knees or his ankles, and he just couldn't walk further than like 30 meters. And he went to the Firefighters charity, and they put him in that anti-gravity thing, and they said they made him do something like, I don't know what it was, 20,000 steps, and he came off and he was like, BS, couldn't do it, walked across the room, it didn't work. And then they just changed something, they took a little bit more weight off or whatever, and he literally did it for like another 20 minutes, and that was it. It was like he learned his pathway. He relearned how to walk because his body was so focused on, compensating or adjusting or anticipating that pain that it wouldn't let him retrain his ability to walk. And that way, it changed his life. He can run again. That is just crazy. We can do that now. And like you said, with all the hydrotherapy and stuff, this is why, without like having that mindset of regrets, when you were told, Dave, you'll never be able to lift again, you'll never be able to this, I always feel different about that now. Like my mum's got some chronic knee pain, but she doesn't want to have the surgery because she gets told it'll only last 10 years or whatever it is. And I'm like, you know what? I bet if you spoke to the doctors of 10 years ago, what we're doing now, they'd laugh you out the room. So I don't think anybody, and please correct me because you're significantly more knowledgeable than myself, can anybody realistically say what we're going to be doing in 10 years?
No, I think it's a very interesting time. I think the modern age. Yeah, I heard that podcast actually. It's a fascinating story when he retrained his brain to walk, which is basically what we're alluding to. But I think this is what I'm talking about. We live in an age when, the new inventions and interventions and protocols are changing rapidly. I'm involved with a few research programs at the moment where you can put kind of clothing on that can readjust and give you feedback. There's a core conditioning belt that lights up on an app where you get it completely right, where it's been proven to transverse abdominis. It's very hard to actually activate it properly, but it's transverse abdominis that really helps with back pain. So all these little things, it's accelerating towards this point where AI is now very much of the moment, and so we just don't know where it's heading. But with your mum, one thing that we do know, and this is where I work with a charity called Arthritis Action, and all the research around OA knee to osteoarthritis is that if you can find a way to strengthen the muscles around that joint, you will feel less pain. It's just the case of trying to find a way of strengthening that joint. And sometimes it starts in water. Sometimes and then the pathway out of that is then to dry land training, and then maybe, or if you've got access to some of that kit we talked about, the anti-gravity stuff, then great. But often it's just gym-based stuff. But I think what I try to promote in people is that strength training for most things. Once you're out of that acute phase, the acute phase can actually then become a chronic phase, unfortunately, in people like myself, where it took 5 years to be able to do anything, where I'm thinking, okay, I'm not just trying to find a way out of the pain now I feel like I can manage the pain. If it's 0 to 10, 10 being agony, 0 being nothing, I was on a constant kind of 7 to 8, and then slowly over time 6. And then sometimes, I'll be honest, I still do have days when I'm dealing with a 7, but it came down to about a 3, which means I can then train around the injury and find ways of training. And
was that a non-medicated 3? Sorry, was that a non-medicated 3? Yeah.
I still occasionally take it. I still occasionally, if it's bad, have access to something for pain relief if I need it. But it's quite rare these days because I know how to manage myself. I'm in many ways healthier. I would say I'm fitter, but I'm healthier. I'm certainly stronger in some ways, but I'm healthier than I was, which is an interesting thing to say, because you think, okay, what's the difference between health and fitness? Well, there's a lot of difference, because you might be physically strong and fit, but you're not. But that discussion we had earlier on about overtraining, doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy in terms of longevity and the kind of long-term damage you're building up. So I think what a lot of people need to hear is that it's okay to have rest days. It's actually better for your long-term performance, and I'm talking long-term performance, to have rest days. To invest in things like mindfulness, to invest in things like good sleep patterns, to invest in things, like yoga, stretching, swimming, all these things that are slightly less detrimental or loading volume on your body. Your body, otherwise, we just think it's on this weird hamster wheel that's just compressing you. And, think about being compressed all the time. What happens when we do that? We shrink. So actually what you need to do is release that compression and have rest days, which your body can spring back, and your body will thank you for that.
That's where swimming's coming for me. Swimming's great. Is my rest days, because it allows me to, entertain that mental addict monkey in my head and go, oh no, we are physically exerting ourselves, and I'm still sure I'm probably not getting the best recovery, but it at least takes the load off my body. It's great for my shoulder mobility. And again, I know for people it's a bit of a ball ache, because they're like, oh, but swimming is, I've got to get changed and I've got to do this, and it's not at my gym, and I know, I get it. But for me, I didn't realize how much mobility I had lost. I saw myself as this big, strong ex-athlete, whatever, this big thing. But I was not fit. I was strong, very one-dimensional strength. Yeah, I was not fit. I was immobile. I'd had a prolapsed lower lumbar as well. I tore my whole right pec off, quarter zone, and my left shoulder twice. And I'm like, hey, this isn't sustainable, even with masses of drugs. And I'm not sure strongman, the sport of it in itself, is particularly, doesn't walk hand in hand with any kind of longevity without some serious crazy.
I used to love that. I love the events, but I would worry about the athletes personally. Now I know what I know. I'd worry about the longevity in that, and in the way that some of them balloon right up and then come right down. That rapid weight gain, weight loss, water retention, I don't think is particularly a pathway to long and healthy life. No, because of sheer kind of pressure it has on your immune system and primarily your heart. But I think there's something to be said around strength training, I still pursue that strong man kind of types of conditioning, but I think strength training is a thing that we need to do more of in society. And unfortunately, when we look at an aging population, so I've been doing a lot of work, Pete, with programs that are funded by government funds that try to encourage later life activity and mobility, which are great. Don't get me wrong; these are fantastic. Any opportunity to get someone who's in a care home or someone who has long-term immobility or long-term conditions more active is fabulous. But when you look into why they might have a condition, they might have diabetes, they might have something called sarcopenia, which is loss of skeletal muscle function and size. That defines one's later life. You could argue that one's level of strength that you are able to retain as an older person defines your quality of life. Because if it's gone, then your world shrinks. Sometimes it shrinks into just one chair. Excuse me. And I think the main message I'm trying to get to people is that don't leave it until you're retired. Why do people, this is the thing that gets me. People spend a lifetime planning for their retirement, financial plans, pensions. They want to travel the world when they're retired, which is now going to be like late 60s, early 70s if you're lucky. But if you haven't also done a plan around retaining your strength, then good luck, frankly.
Yeah,
because
your body is your vehicle. Years. Your body's not going to take you to those places. Yeah. I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro one day. Well, you're not. You can't even walk.
Yeah, exactly, Pete. And this is a thing that I've seen because I've been there at the cold face working with people who are that person, who haven't lived a bad life, but they just haven't, and I often work with people who are in their 60s who are still fit as a fiddle, so, they're out there walking every day. They're playing tennis, they're cycling, they're doing lots of stuff, they're hill walking, which is fabulous, but they haven't had a habit or familiarity with strength training. What I call pure strength training. We'll come on to that if you want. But I think the problem is with that is that when you hit middle age, so when you hit 45 onwards, as a man or a woman, your hormonal profile changes and your ability to hang on to your lean skeletal muscle tissue just falls away. And that's for everyone. And if you haven't built up a reasonable amount of skeletal muscle tissue via strength training, then it's going to put you at a disadvantage of someone who has. If you haven't continued to strength train through middle age and into older age and continue that, then you're at a disadvantage to someone who has. And sarcopenia, or that loss of skeletal muscle tissue, leads to frailty, leads to osteoporosis and fracture when one falls. It also leads to more likelihood of falling because you haven't got the power to readjust your gait or step if you trip.
Yeah.
So put it like this: if you strength train if you've got someone who's strength training and they've strength trained from retirement through to 80, it puts their level of physical ability at the age of someone who's around about 60 who hasn't. So it's a 20-year difference. So you can give yourself a 20-year advantage as an 80-year-old.
That's where I think like those colossal, they're not marginal gains. These are massive surges. I feel like when you're a kid, when you're 20s and 30s, you can't really tell the difference unless you're doing it to an extreme. It's harder. And I'm probably wrong in this because of the state. I sometimes stand in the playground now and other people in their 30s who I went to school with, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, I'm no better or worse than them, but just the decisions that they have made, or probably the decisions they don't realize they've made with their lifestyle and where that's taken to them now. But to go back to your 20s, like you can't really tell the difference between anybody. But then as you get on older and older, it's that analogy of like the aeroplane, isn't it? Where just a couple of degrees left or right, yeah, over the next 100 meters, you're probably not going to tell. You think all the planes are in the same place. But in like 20 years, they are on a whole different direction. It is just colossal when you start to make those changes and embed those habits. So you said about pure strength training. So some of this, people they've got no idea what any of that means. Just break that down in terms of functional exercise or things that people could do in a gym, because people don't want to spend thousands and thousands of pounds. What should they be looking to do?
Yeah, I mean, strength training is different for everyone, but ultimately, so you've got what I would call your baseline strength. Then you've got things like muscular endurance. Then you've got things like, the rate of force production or power. And strength training is your ability of a muscle or a muscle group to contract maximally. And that might look different for a lot of people. And so everyone has different builds and different life stages, but strength is your base upon which you build everything else. So some people would spend a long time working on hypertrophy, which is, classic kind of bodybuilding type thing, which is, if you looked in a gym at someone, it would be kind of, 3 to 4 sets of between 8 and 10 reps at about 80% maximum. When you talk about actual strength training, where you get adaptation in the musculoskeletal system, which allows you to actually lift heavier as opposed to concentrating on hypertrophy, then that would look something like sets of 5 to 6, with 6 being almost impossible. So near maximal.
That scares me though. That scares me now because I've tore my pec, because I was deadlifting 350 kilos and benching stupid weights, and I tore so many things, and now I'm scared. Do you know what I mean? Anything below 4 reps, I just don't even go near it. I don't even go near it because it just scares me. Yeah.
I think if you've had an injury, and I class myself in this as well, then you've got to kind of be mindful of that. I think there are always areas that you can do that kind of training with. So for instance, I'd probably be looking to you and thinking, you might want to kind of lighten the reps with your particular case in terms of upper body strength and make it a bit more functional. So I wouldn't be looking at kind of using Olympic bar or dumbbells particularly heavy with you, but what we'll be looking at is potentially looking at weighted press ups or weighted dips or weighted pull ups as well.
Dumbbells, so I can still go okay with dumbbells, and
there's always a way of training around.
I go heavier with squat, and I don't go heavy with deadlift. Deadlift worries me because I've tore my lat at one point in time as well. But my legs, I feel like I can train most of everything I need. I still deadlift, but I don't deadlift below like 7 reps, I would say.
Well,
whereas I can still get it out of the squat.
Right. I mean, the other thing you can do is, and you can utilize the equipment that we now have access to, so you can do leg press heavy. I mean, the body doesn't really know what you're doing, if you know what I mean. It's kind of, as long as you're getting that force through the muscles, then you can find ways you can use equipment. But for you, we're talking about you there, but that might be for someone who's in their 50s or 60s. It might be that 5 or 6 press ups are actually, you get to rep 7 and it's quite difficult, especially if you're doing it in a certain way. You've got different sort of positions you can put your hands, and certainly lunges, box lunges can be that difficult. So my point being that it's different for everyone, but that's the concept.
Have you done any of that knees over toes stuff? You ever seen any of that? You seen that guy?
Yeah, no, I like it, and I also like posterior chain training as well.
Mate. Honestly, I had issues with my knees from heavy squatting for years, wearing big knee wraps and all that sort of stuff. And now being able to do the sled pulls and just like putting a couple of 20 kilo dumbbells on my shoulders or whatever, and really driving that knee far over the toe. My knees feel better now. And I know there's an aspect there of weight loss as well, but like my knees feel stronger now. I'm very optimistic. Like in the Firefighter Challenge stuff that I recently did, my body couldn't have done that 5 years ago. It scared me. I'd have injured stuff.
Yeah, and so I think the posterior chain stuff, and I think that just trying to have a bit of variation. I think we go down certain corrals in weight training and strength training, and that it's got to be a certain way. And don't get me wrong, I like the idea of using some more traditional stuff like the power moves. So for instance, for you, maybe when you've got the traditional power clean, you can use a rack clean where it's the bar is already at, above your knees. So doing like a slightly phased rack pull.
Yeah.
You don't have to do, so you can find ways of getting stronger. It doesn't have to be that, but you can be using bands. You can get a lot of resistance in bands.
Yeah.
It can be using own body weight, because it depends on what stage you're at. You can get quite a lot of resistance, and therefore strength adaptation via everyday activities.
Yeah.
But we're talking about you in that example because you're already strong. And for you, it'll be, okay, Pete, you're already strong, you built that up. Now find ways of maintaining that strength via resistance training. But resistance training can take all forms, as we said. It can be like a weighted pull-up or dip or press-up. It can be more the functional stuff, like, for instance, training specifically around the firefighter challenge movements that you do. But for other people, it will be different. So one size does not fit all. But the premise is that unless one focuses on stimulating the body in that way, then we're probably not doing pure strength training. We're probably doing more akin to muscular endurance.
Yeah.
And it's within the strength training that I think lies one of the preventative things that we can do for sarcopenia. It's actually within also the neuromuscular adaptation that we get, and we have to be mindful of, that lays, I think, one of the more beneficial long-term health things that we can do for ourselves. So things like balance exercises, as you've already said. Once we've worked on our baseline strength, what we can do then is start looking at more kind of occupational or lifestyle specific training. So it's always got to be what we call in conditioning specificity. How do we look at this individual and think, okay, well, what can we do to make your life less dangerous or more enjoyable? And so, for instance, I gave you a few examples earlier on in terms of firefighting. In power training, I think, or the rate at which you can fully contract and create that power more quickly is important for, I think, firefighting professions, because it's that ability to adapt to unknowns quickly that might save yourself and might save you from falling, for instance, or it might give you the reaction time that you need. And that comes from a baseline, though, of baseline strength. Strength is what we build everything upon. Strength even helps things like running, because it's known to improve running gait and running efficiency. So everyone should be doing it, irrespective of if you're a runner, if you're a firefighter, if you're in the military, if you're just someone who's looking at their retirement. Strength training should be a part of your life. And it's different for everyone. And then on top of that, so for instance, power training is really relevant for the firefighting profession, in my opinion. Power being a similar movement to a strength movement, but it's just done with a little bit of a intent. The intention is more about acceleration. So it's actually that neuromuscular intention. So from the brain into the nervous system, into the muscles, of explosion, which actually does give the ability to then stabilize unexpectedly if you find yourself in a situation where you have to engage that neuromuscular system.
Yeah.
The classic one would be you're in a building, you can't see where you are, the floor suddenly feels weird in front of you and you step back quickly, or you're at the top of a ladder, on top of a turntable ladder, as has happened to me in the past, and you go to step off onto the building, and then the turntable ladder gets hit by a gust of wind, and you've got a split second to grab back on before, it's those sorts of things. That's power in real-time examples. Or an older person steps off a curb and has to right themselves before they fall onto their face. That quick acceleration of contraction that rights your body into an upright position is an example of power. So all these things, though, as I say, are built upon your baseline strength, and baseline strength will be different for everyone. I'm not saying you have to take up Olympic weightlifting. What I'm saying is find a way of challenging yourself in terms of movements that you find difficult and work on them.
Yeah.
Because it is different for everyone. I think strength in middle age is and should be a priority, as is metabolic health, in terms of aerobic fitness as well. But don't forget the strength, because the longer you've been doing it, I would say, like with anything, crash diets or crash exercise regimes, you lose those gains very quickly. And there's a reason, because gains are mediated through the nervous system. We have a nervous system which is made up of nerves which are covered in things called myelin, which insulates them like a wire. The thicker that myelin, the more skillful and precise you'll find control over movement is. And if you spend hours and hours and hours building up that via repetition, via practice, and I'm including strength movements in that, then you're more likely to maintain that movement and maintain that fine control, and therefore maintain that strength. And there is some research to suggest that strength is like a language, in that it takes thousands of hours to become fluent often. And why would you want to leave that until you're 60 or 70?
Your mind's almost got a little bit less of that sort of neuroplasticity, and those grooves are a little bit harder and longer to cut, and you haven't got the resiliency of it. It's a bit like learning to fall over. If you didn't play rugby or anything as a kid, trying to learn to fall over in your 60s is not good. I wanted to just close on one point before, because I wanted to take you back to the point you said about decreasing bodily hormones and testosterone, and if there's anything we can do about that. But before we go there, I just wanted to finish with some kind of cheap tricks and tips on solutions for station gyms and stuff like that. Because when I was listening to you then, I was like looking back through the programs that I've done with a few of the people on my watch and stuff like that around, yes, some of the compound lifts, but then, and it was probably more for myself, and then it bled into them, was when I wasn't just doing all of that stuff, I started doing little bits of like plyometrics and like box jumps, and even like slam balls, like throwing a slam ball up against a wall outside. I think they call them wall balls and whatever in CrossFit. But those kind of things where your body has to catch just only like 5 kilos or less or more, whatever your preference is. What are your thoughts on that? Because this stuff hasn't got to be really expensive, has it?
Yeah, true. It's all fantastic for training exactly what we just talked about. That's all kind of power-based. It's that acceleration with the slam ball. Plyometrics is about that intention to spring and land. It's fantastic for neurological aspect of strength as well. So, but that to me is like the second stage. The first stage would always have to be, that investment in time in terms of just doing that really controlled strength work. And that doesn't have to be massively expensive. In my day, we had these multi-gyms, which were still the modular multi-gyms, which still did the job. For me, I think, I know one of the things you ask people is what exercises would you say?
If you had to go on a desert island, what were the ones?
And I think that's a really good question, because it got me thinking. I thought, what am I going to say to that? And actually, I know what I was going to say. Pull-ups. Where you can put a weighted vest on if you want to make it harder. But pull-ups, you can start. I love the progression in pull-ups. So you can start with exercise bands to help you, and then you can progress onto own body weight, and then you can progress onto weighted pull-ups. Pull-ups, again, just like the row machine, don't really see many people doing it because it finds you out. There's nowhere to hide in a pull-up bar. Okay, it's hard.
It's really hard. I still struggle with it now. I do hanging holds
I do, but I love it.
because it just takes. It's so hard.
Yeah, it's hard, and that's good. Hard is good when it comes to strength training. You should be failing on around about rep 6. All right, and if you're a big old unit, and I am as well, that's about where I get to before I have to kind of have a bit of a rest.
Mate, it was just training. Before January this year, I managed to get back to 10. I could do 10 now, and that's from a dead hang. That's for and that is. I need to get back into it. I don't need to. I'd like to get back into it because I'd like to
get yourself a sand jacket, and then that'll put you right down to about 4 again.
I feel like I want to get to 15 before I drop back down to, because again, only because of that lat tear in the past, I always get nervous going too low on anything like that. So I'm going to try and get to 15, and then I'm going to drop back and start adding some weight to it, is where I think my head is at. I wanted to ask you about that hormonal aspect. Oh, sorry, no, go on.
No, I was going to say, and then dips. And then I like reverse sled pulls. So pull-ups, dips, reverse sled pulls, and then things like something I do is like an inclined reverse lunge, but in a single file. So you imagine like a forward lunge, deep lunge, but this is a reverse lunge up a hill. or up an incline makes it very kind of knees over toes. But then the balance aspect of keeping the straight line as you do it is difficult. It's something I probably have to demonstrate, but they're really functional and really good for balance and lower extremity power.
That must be great for the hip flexors as well, though, because actually,
Fantastic.
if you're going up an incline behind you, that's quite a hell of a stretch as well to be able to get that depth to put you.
Yeah, it just gets you moving. It opens you. It gets you moving. It's balance. It's everything. So I think those 4 things are. If you do those things, then you're probably going to be doing okay. Actually,
I'm going to do that so there's a park like about 4 minutes from my house. I regularly go there because we've got this 20. I call it the 20 Oaks Hill. There's 20 oak trees up this hill, and I'll often do like sprint 5, walk back 3, do 10 press ups. Sprint 5, sprint up 5 trees. Yeah. But then I've never thought to do any kind of, because I had an issue with my calf a little while ago, and I think running up that hill backwards helped me out with that a lot as well. And I'm going to go and try that out actually. I wanted to ask you.
Walking up hills, I think it's a bit weird, but walk backwards, unless people think you're mad. But it kind of makes sense when you look at the physiology.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about testosterone reduction. So, testosterone versus estrogen. Estrogen obviously drops off a cliff more so than testosterone is more of like a progressive decrease for males, isn't it? I'm going to butcher this to death. So, if you could just give us a rundown of. Because for women, I feel like as much as we don't talk about it, we actually do talk about it more than probably we talk about it for men, because it involves some life changes and some more obvious physiological changes perhaps for them, as well as the mood changes. But whereas for men, it's like a creeping thing, isn't it? It happens over a longer period of time, if I'm right in saying that. How does it happen? Yeah. How early should people be thinking about it? I know that's a very tricky question to answer, but and what sort of life habits can be some big wins maybe over the long term that we might want to avoid or think about?
That's a great question. So from about, some people say 45, but from about 50, people might start to notice some more generalized aging differences in your body. But one of the things that does happen is testosterone levels start to decrease. And the reason I'm interested in that is the effect it has upon maintaining one's skeletal muscle mass. One of the things that maintaining that skeletal muscle mass is mediated through is testosterone, amongst other things. I think the thing with that is different for everyone, Pete. So some people don't really start to notice it or have a detrimental effect until their mid-50s. Some people a bit longer, and that's all to do, I think it's genetically predisposed. We all have it, but some people have a higher rate than others. But the thing that we do know is that one's lifestyle can also affect it. So if you've really burnt the candle, or are burning the candle, and this is really relevant to the fire service community, so sleepless nights, for instance, exhaustion and fatigue, interrupted sleep patterns, stimulant use, stress, anxiety, all these things will burn you through your testosterone a lot quicker, arguably, than if you had not been doing that kind of lifestyle, that sort of shift work. So I think it's a really relevant thing. And I think that the easy wins, the low-hanging fruit for someone who's a firefighter is to make sure that they can do as much as they can when they're not on shift to reestablish a really good sleep hygiene, to do things that aren't going to be too adrenalizing in terms of activity. So the last thing you want to do is go and smash yourself in your 4 days off if you're doing 4 on 4 off. Because you need to give that whole thing about your body in compression if you're training too hard. Well, it's not just it's your whole body, including your hormonal pathways and feedback loops that get compressed and exhausted. So being kind to yourself, just giving yourself permission to have a couple of days off a week, and looking at your regime around your shift pattern will be helpful in that. It's trying to stay away from stimulants such as alcohol and caffeine, having really good sleep hygiene, as I say, and then doing things like yoga, mindfulness, meditation to bring your body out of your sympathetic arousal state and into your parasympathetic state is all going to help in the long term. But fundamentally, we're all going to lose that profile that we had when we were in our 30s as we get into our 50s. So I think accepting that, but also, my main message hopefully is that you shouldn't stop doing some of the things you've been doing. So in terms of strength training as a younger person, you've got to kind of train more clever as you age, though. So don't beast yourself to within an inch of your life in your 40s and 50s and 60s, but still do train hard. But I think the lessons you learn is that you give yourself time off to recover. And that habit should be embedded in your 30s, as far as I'm concerned. So there's lots we can do to mitigate the effects of that hormonal change. But unless you're going to take a supplement, which I wouldn't advise, then there's only so much you can do. A lot of people, I think there's quite a big trend in America to take testosterone supplementation.
That's massive now, because
low levels of
it's been very acceptable for women to do testosterone replacement therapy as they begin to experience menopause. Is vilified a little bit with men. Given the abuse that I did to my body and testosterone supplements and performance enhancers when I was young, I do envisage in my 50s having those conversations, because I had a little bit of therapy, hormone therapy, after I'd stopped taking things, because my blood work was all over the place and all that sort of jazz, and erectile dysfunctions and all this sort of stuff.
Right.
I don't know what that's going to look like in the future. But sorry, I interrupted you. It's getting very popular in the States, and I'm sure sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's not done well. But what's your thoughts on it?
I think ideally you should just try to avoid it as an individual and try to do it more naturally, so via diet, lifestyle. I think for you, Pete, there's a lot of research to say that given a number of years of living that right lifestyle, you can correct and increase those levels. In fact, James from the Behind the Shield podcast has posted something recently about his own journey, where, via cutting alcohol down, prioritizing sleep and rest days, still training hard, but having that balance in his life, immersing yourself in communities that interest you, so that mindfulness meditation, as well as the hard physical work, can pay off. That's anecdotal in his case, but there is evidence to suggest that lifestyle choices are probably the way to go. And I think if you've been now practicing some of that for a number of years, Pete, then I think if you continue, the main thing is if you continue to, and maybe look at some of those other lifestyle things that are kind of reasonably easy and within our control to do, then I would have thought you'd be okay, actually.
I felt like I stopped young enough, and also
I would agree. That's why I'm saying that.
I've never drank either. So I drank when I was 17 till I was about 19, and then I didn't drink after that. I know it's going off on a tangent, and I know it's going to be emotive for some people, but I would love to just ask your opinion. Why is alcohol the accepted drug, and how can it benefit us or not? That's a massive question. Sorry, it's a controversial one. It's so embedded in our culture, isn't it?
Country. Well, both this country, but also the services. Any uniform service is the way to decompress. And I think the problem is you get into a loop. I can say this because I've come out the other side of it. Really, you get into a loop where you get home after a shift, or you might have, it might be around stress and anxiety, something you've experienced at work. You're going to reach for something, aren't you? And I think it's so accessible. In my day, there was a big drinking culture, and bonded you as a team, but not necessarily. I wouldn't say it's necessarily long term. It's not something that's sustainable. I think we all have these moments in life and think, okay, I'm going to kind of cut that down a little bit. And I think I would encourage anyone who's struggling with their sleep to look into cutting that down, because it does interrupt deep sleep, does interrupt REM sleep, as do as do sleeping tablets. So not an easy one, that, Pete. It's more of a cultural shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's always
Yeah,
fascinated me, the social study of it, because it is so embedded in everything.
yeah,
And I just,
yeah.
it's blind, it's just blind luck, because my parents drink, my sister drinks. I think I just didn't do it because I was so involved in high level sport, and it was just
Yeah,
luck that I didn't get into
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But my
yeah.
wife now doesn't drink either, and I feel a little bit bad about that because I feel like it's the value of association, isn't it? If you spend lots of time around people that don't necessarily drink. She was never a big drinker, but now she doesn't drink at all, and I'm always like, hey, when we're out, have a drink, blah blah. She's like, no, I'm not really bothered, and I don't know if maybe she's just doing that because I don't, but we digress. I wanted to ask you about posture. Sorry, I know I'm drawing on, but posture is always a big one for me, and I wanted to ask you about, because we can do all this fitness stuff, but that's always a small part of the day. So, what are some of the common issues you maybe see with people's postures sometimes? And certainly the way that we move when we're holding things, or the way that we now sit at desks and all that sort of stuff. I feel like that doesn't get spoken about enough. If you can go off on that for a minute and just let us know your thoughts.
I think we live in an age when we don't move enough. I think of technology has taken a lot of the movement out of our lives. You just need to look at the average person. They're generally looking down at their phone or sat. And I think, World Health Organization has recently said that an office environment is actually, detrimental to health, a health risk, which is a massive statement. If you think about the way we move in straight lines, trains, roads, pathways, and actually what we're evolved as human organisms to do is like multi-directional, moving in different ways, exploring landscapes, I would say. It's only the last few hundred years really that we've become more modernized. And I think it does affect. We're not meant to be staring into screens and hunched over desks. If you do find yourself in that position, then try and do some stuff that counters that. Really common sense, Pete. There isn't really an answer, because I think we've got to, unfortunately, modern life technology leads to this. But I think there's going to be a bit of a pushback at some point, where I think working from home has helped with that for a lot of people, in that they can set up their desks as they want. They don't have to get on trains. They can do a walk before work, or they can do some exercise in between meetings. And I would always encourage people to do that. There's not one size fits all, because everyone has a different skeletal and morphology type. So movement is the main thing. I think standing desks help.
Literally just about to say that.
And
I've got a
meetings.
standing desk.
Yeah, and, walking meetings, man. If I had enough signal around here, I would have done this on a walk if I could, if I was confident of the signal. So I think, basic common sense really, mate.
I have a standing desk and a balance board at home. And that allows me to just entertain my body, as well as not sitting hunched over. My wife still, she's got a desk set up on the other side of this office. She still wants to sit down and do hers. I think it's just a cultural thing for her. But I've got all sorts of little rollers. I'm rubbing my what's it at the minute? That sounds weird. I'm rubbing my my arches. I've got one of those little what's it called, like a nugget, or peanut, sorry.
Yeah.
I always roll it underneath my feet when I'm just chatting away to people, because I just love the way it feels as well, to be honest with you. I wanted to close with just some wider holistic pieces around industry that you've worked with and the people that you've worked with. And I wanted to start with sort of leadership. It's always something I love to ask people. So thinking about your 15 years there, moving out of it, I suppose now really, without the level of authority that you would have as a uniformed individual, your ability to influence people or build rapport or get people on board with changing their habits and stuff like that is so many leadership lessons within that. So when we look at leadership, what are some of the best aspects that you've seen in some of the people that you admire, or what are the sort of things that you've tried to utilize in your day-to-day?
I think with leadership, for me, it's always, I think the lessons I've learned from people is that, be prepared to do the things that you ask people to do, just very broadly. I think that it's massively important to if you're a leader in whatever realm it is to be to have an understanding of what you're asking people to do. I can reference a couple of situations in my earlier career where I feel like it's not a critique, but it's an observation that potentially some stuff that I was asked to do that they probably didn't want to do. Not that they felt I should do, but they just didn't want to. And I think that stayed with me. And I think when I was older, when I was a more senior firefighter on the watch, I remember trying to break that pattern in that I would always, if there was a junior buck coming on the station, that I would try to have those conversations with them that I didn't have. Because I think otherwise you stand the risk as an individual in any walk of life. If you have an experience you felt was pretty negative, you can easily fall into that and say, well, fuck it, I'm going to do that as well.
Yeah.
But I think if you can break that cycle and actually have those conversations with individuals that potentially you should have had 20 years ago, but if you can be the person to give that advice to someone and help them, then it's a hugely healing process for you as a leader, but also really positive in terms of just trying to do a bit of culture shift from the inside. It's easy for me to say now I'm on the outside, but that's certainly my experience, and I take that with me through anything else I've done, you know, in kind of sport and, you know, these working groups I've been involved with, is that you know, you can tell quite quickly people listen to you more if you say, you know, that you're prepared to do that work. I think if you're prepared to do that work, and that's what I love about the fire services and meritocracy of it, in that certainly in my day, you went in as a firefighter or probationary firefighter, your way up, so that the leadership know, you know, what they are asking you to do. That's quite a rare thing I've found as I've gone on through other careers. It's quite a rare thing, quite a valuable thing that the fire service has, where other services don't. We have more officer class that go in as officer class, and I think I would hope that it's maintained, because I think that's what gives us an advantage and gives us a uniqueness. That's why we are different from the military, actually. That's what separates us out. Not only our intent to save life, not take it, but the meritocracy of we all come in the same rank. I love that about the fire service, and I think it makes it a real family, actually. And internationally, it's pretty similar. So yeah, that's what I would say about leadership.
For people that aren't in those leadership positions as well, though, and I'm just thinking for the two of us, people that are parents, because like you were saying about your boys earlier, you know, and what you do with them, and when you go away with them, you're leading by example. You're leading by your actions. They're learning with their eyes, just not their ears. You know, people don't have to be a leader of a service or a manager of a team or anything like that. If you're a parent, you know, you're a leader. So those same things that you've just perfectly articulated there are so useful, because people watch what you do. That's how they learn.
Oh yeah, and it's very simple, isn't it? Leadership, it gets wrapped up in all sorts of things, but you know, lead by example. Don't ask people to do something you're not prepared or that you haven't done yourself in the past. And I think you know, in a family setting as well, you know, if for whatever reason you've had a bit of a shit childhood, you know, and you haven't had the conversation with your parents that you might have benefited from, or from grandparents, or from teachers that you probably should have had but you didn't, for whatever reason you didn't get, then, you know, what about leading yourself? You know, you've got to be your own leader for yourself before you can lead other people. And I think if you find yourself in a situation where you can break that negativity, where, you know, you might have really benefited from a bit of support or advice once, if you find yourself giving that, in an opportunity to give that, then bloody give it, because it will help with your own growth. You know, it's almost like you might be speaking to a child or a colleague or a family member, but you're also speaking to that version of yourself that never had that conversation. That person, often with trauma, you get frozen in that spot, in that age bracket. You know, you get frozen into that spot in space and time.
Yeah.
If you can have those conversations as a person giving advice, it releases you, in my opinion. And I think that's quite a powerful.
Yeah. You can be the hero that you needed at that time. You can be that person for somebody else.
You can do it for yourself, man, because, you know, that child in you still needs to hear it. And if you're giving it to someone else, it's still that child, you know, on a deep level. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
A question I often ask, and I'd like to ask this in two ways if I could, is about, you know, common pieces of advice or common pieces of bad advice that you hear that you think people should avoid? But I want to ask it firstly in the case of your fire service career, and then secondly, I'll ask it in terms of people's general health or fitness. But firstly, in the fire service, was there any common advice that you heard that you just thought, that's BS looking back on it?
I think, I think some of the stuff early on in my career was, don't bother going for a promotion, that's BS, they're all assholes and stuff. And that's not true. It's just those people didn't want to do it. And I think if you're minded to, then do it and grow, because it will lead to fantastic experiences. I got the opportunity to go to become a PTI within about 4 years, and there was a lot of advice for me saying, don't do that, don't go into training, blah, blah, but I really wanted to become a PTI. I was there for 2 years, and it was a fantastic couple of years. If I'd listened to those people, I would never have done it, and I would never have had some fabulous experiences and life skills that I got from being an instructor, because I wasn't just PTI, I was a real fire trainer, BA instructor, all sorts of different things. And I came out of that experience fundamentally a better firefighter, absolutely tactically, operationally as good as I could be.
I love that, because I think so many people do that as well, though, because they had that opportunity once, or they had that thing that they wanted to do. And if you go and do it, then you're just shining a light sometimes on the fact that they didn't. And if you don't go and do it, then it validates their decision not to have done it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And exactly. And with education, I remember studying on night duty. I was studying, red, white, night, and a lot of the people were saying, "Oh, what are you doing that for? What's the point of that?" Actually, the point is that I'm trying to better myself. I'm trying to grow as an individual. And you're right, it was because they hadn't had that. They hadn't had the drive, or hadn't wanted to, or maybe the opportunity to. But I mean, they're only still quite young themselves at the time. They still could. I think if you find yourself challenging people, it's probably a good sign you're living a good life.
Yeah, 100%.
You're kind of developing and grow, because without growth, you become stagnant as human beings. Like a pond, it becomes stagnant itself. So you got to keep moving, ideally. And it's taken me a while, to feel like that. But I think the main advice I'd give to people in the general population, and the bad advice that people hear, is around retirement. Put your feet up, out to pasture. Take it easy. No, don't take it easy. And the other thing is, work hard, play hard. No, work hard, train clever. And when you retire, you've got every opportunity and no excuses. You should have prepared ideally, just like you prepare financially, prepare physically, and carry that on so you can really enjoy the retirement you desire and that you deserve, and especially in the fire service, mate.
Beautiful. Because I think now what you're talking about and the message that you're sharing is so relevant, and I think there'll be people screaming out for this information, because, as you'll know yourself, we're hitting that point where we are recruiting so many people in the fire and rescue service. And that means, we're doing that because there's so many people moving into that phase. There's so many people retiring now. I think I read something the other day, like within a 6-year span, we'll have turned over 40% of the UK fire and rescue service. That is colossal. But that says to me that people are now setting off on that next chapter of life, on that next phase, and they'll have many of these questions. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you if they want a bit more specific, or they want to share something personal, or they want some advice or some help about the things you've discussed today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I work with a few organisations, and I work with individuals and organisations alike. I always prefer working with organisations because you can scale it more easily. But so I've got a website, davidvaux, or you can look me up on LinkedIn, which I can give you the link to after this, Pete. Just direct message me. Very happy to talk it through. But yeah, I think there's some easy wins for fire service as a whole. But I know that fire service break down into individual brigades, but there are some easy wins. And I do think it's about education. I think there are some fundamental messages that need to be shared in terms of preparing, as we do in every other aspect of our lives, for retirement. But it's one that basically drops off the radar sometimes. But it's something that everyone can do. And trust me, everyone can get a little bit stronger and be a bit more mindful of the neuromuscular pathways in everyday practice, because I work with 95-year-olds, mate, and they improve. Just imagine what you can do if you're 55, so it's not too late is what I'm saying.
I agree, mate. I'm so excited about the next 40 years of my life. I'm 30, what am I now?
That's great.
34. And I'm like, because this is where it really counts for me. You could have got away with so much craziness when you were younger, but this is the bit where it's like, okay, who was paying attention?
Yeah.
Who was taking notes?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So regard to that.
Just set your parameters now. Just set your goals. I have to say, it's a bit of a strange thing to say, but if your goal should ideally be to be in your mid-90s and to die in your own bed.
Yeah.
And I say that because I'm not focusing on the manner of your dying, because we're all going to die. But what I'm talking about is the manner of how you live until the day you die. And ideally, you're in your own bed, living your life you want to live, having made the choices you've made. You're not on medication, ideally, you're not suffering ill health, having care. You're in your own bed, which means that you've achieved all that. And I think if you start to think in the long term as a goal, people don't like to think about that, but certainly I think that it's okay to think about that. And the way to do that, and the good news is that there is a way of doing that within 80% of our control, I would say, our lifestyle choices that lead to long-term health and strength preservation. So start to think about the long term, start to focus in on that as a goal, have it in the background, and then set certain periods in your week around maintaining strength, activity, and everything else that goes with it, and enjoy yourself.
Mate, I think you're so right. And I think as more and more fire and rescue services and police officer services and ambulance services become more appreciative, and as it gets raised to them more about the importance of these long-term health and well-being, and they invest in their people, I know there'll be a greater calling for that, and I look forward to seeing you lead the charge with it.
Well, thanks, mate. Yeah, I'll certainly love to come back on and chat with you in a little while. Again, I've really enjoyed this, and I'm starting to put together more formalized stuff around this now. So I've just probably take it more from the aging population into the general population, and looking into sketching out and starting to work on a bit of a book as well. So yeah, I'll be happy to come back.
Yes, mate.
And
please
speak to you about that when I've got that. But that's no.
That is such.
It's going to take a bit of a hurdle, but I'm gonna get. I'm saying it because it's going to make me do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Put it out there. Social accountability.
So, yeah.
Beautiful. David, thank you for taking so much time away from your family and your personal life. Look after yourself, brother, and let's touch base soon.
Cool, dude. It's been a blast, mate. I'll see you again soon.
Firefighters Podcast is a global podcast seeking to develop, inspire and motivate the world of the emergency services operators. Through a series of wide-ranging conversations celebrating those within our sector, we seek to encourage and support this incredible group of people. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield, and I speak with individuals from all walks of life who I sincerely believe can add value to or develop those who have chosen this life path. Please support your emergency services wherever you are in the world, and thank you for listening.